How you been, bro?
Man, I've been chilling. I've just been trying to transition jobs and get ready for this next chapter. How about you?
Man, same, bro. Just came back from vacation, was celebrating Michaela's birthday, so that was nice.
Heck
Went
yeah.
down to Hollywood. Well, we stopped in Jacksonville, then went down to Hollywood, and then stopped in Orlando on the way back to go to Disney, and then came back up
Okay.
to Jacksonville, and then came back home. So it was a whole little trip on the
Oh
week. But
wow, so you went all around Florida.
I was yeah, we was sightseeing, but it was man, it was lovely though, man. It
Heck
was
yeah.
awesome.
You get some
Yeah.
beach time?
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, we was out there. Well, only the last day was it was kind of rainy, but the rest of
Yeah.
the time it was sunny. So I was out there getting black, bro. It's out there getting dark.
Heck yeah, bro. That melanin, baby. That's
That
what I'm talking
melanin.
about.
Yeah,
Yes,
man.
sir.
But so what we're talking about back today, right? Some back training.
Yes, sir. Back training.
Ooh, back training, back cues. Yeah, so I mean, I think what I'll do is give a little bit of so here's what I do. So when it comes to back training, I think we kind of mentioned this when we talked about it briefly, but I think this is one that a lot of people miss out on when it comes to certain cues that really, really help, especially because a lot of times when you train back, you can't actually see what you're training and that kind of muscle mind connection and be able to actually visually see it from everything from the interior. If you're looking in the mirror, you don't really get that, the same way back a lot of times. So knowing the right cues to put yourself in the right position, just because you can't always see yourself and putting yourself in the right position is something that you could probably really benefit from. And I think there's a lot of small things with back, whether it be pull downs or rows or deadlifts or back extensions that make the movement literally like 10 times more efficient and more effective, especially because that muscle mind connection actually be able to try to like feel what you're working is so important. So let's just start off with, and I'll let you choose what we start off with. I don't really care, but you want to talk about rows first? Because I think it's probably some universal stuff for rows, or we can
Well,
talk about pull
yeah,
down
I think
rows.
rows are definitely we should touch on those because that is the one thing I see done very inconsistently. I feel like one of the hardest things about rows is, kind of deciding what is most effective for you actually getting the most out of the target muscles, right? Like with rows, you're really focused on the lats and like a lot more of like the lower part of your lats, like the when it comes and a lot of people associate rows with thickness, definitely
Mhm.
a quality of back training. I feel like it's important because it also can transfer over to things like deadlifts when you do a solid barbell row correctly. That's the one that I see bastardized, to put it plainly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times with rows though, there's you really just want to focus on cueing the row as to get your body as parallel with the floor as possible. And I think another thing too is playing around with your grip so that you are able to maximize the motion of driving your elbows back and really feeling it through your elbows, thinking of your hands as like hooks to the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, that those are just some things. But what about what are some things that you feel like on rows are of utmost importance?
Yeah, I think all back pulling movements, if you're, gripping something and pulling, whether it be a pull down or rows, I think doing kind of like that thumbless grip or thumb over the top is something that a lot of people teach, something that I definitely always do, because it really does help you engage the forearms just a little bit less. And so you're kind of putting a little bit more in the back. Now, the heavier you go, if you want to use that same grip, you might need to use some straps, depending on what you're
Yes.
doing. But I think that's one thing that is, probably just from the grip standpoint that you should be doing. Secondly, when it comes to rows, at least, especially towards the end of the movement, and you can play around with this with different exercises, but usually the more shoulder extension you can get, so the more I can open up here and get this back further and get that elbow
Mm-hmm.
back even further, you're going to get more range of motion, obviously, which is key, which is what you really want. But that is the one area that a lot of people miss out on, even when getting the elbows back as far as they can. So, what I mean by that is you'll see a lot of people, and I don't know if I can really kind of show, but you'll see a lot of people almost the shoulder doesn't move back enough. Like it doesn't actually retract, it kind of stays where
Yeah,
it
it gets
is.
to like
And that elbow
there
would just go back. So then I end up like this instead of letting that
and then
shoulder go back as
rounded
well.
position.
And then I end up here. You see how much more you open up there, and you get just so much more engagement. And so once I
Hmm.
learned that and kind of figured that out, and I started giving that to clients, and they said the same, like, damn, like I really feel that a lot more. So thinking about opening up at the chest, taking that chest out almost in the opposite direction that you're pulling is one thing I think for any back row that is, kind of crucial. And then also
Yeah.
setting yourself in a plane through the stretch and the contraction that like set your shoulders is kind of what I mean. I'm trying to be very clear in what I say because it's kind of hard to explain. But if you set your
Hmm.
shoulders in the right plane, like you let your shoulders move too much, but you got them let move just freely enough for the stretch, if that makes sense. Like especially for
Yes.
lats. Let's just focus on lats so that I'm being more clear. But if your shoulders stay very, very low, even on a row where you're trying to hit your lats and you go forward and the shoulders stay really, really low and set, and then you come back, it's the same thing. You try to stretch out as much as you can and almost protract or protract a little bit on the shoulders, but they have to stay low. And then when you pull back, same thing, the shoulders stay low and you're trying to open up at the chest as much as you possibly can as well. So setting the shoulders wherever whatever plane they're supposed to be in through that full range of motion is also, I think, another thing that people don't really think about. So I guess those are my top three: grip, thumbless grip, actually opening up at the shoulders, so maximize shoulder extension at the end of the movement, and then actually
Hmm.
just making sure while you're actually going through the movement that the shoulder is kind of set in the plane of that range of motion that needs to be in
Hmm.
order for you to kind of keep the tension on whatever part of the back you're working. For me personally, I think for rows, those are probably three big things that anybody could add into their row right now, and if they do it correctly, immediately see a difference or feel a
Oh
difference.
yeah. Well, and I want to add that on top of all of that, I think one of the biggest things that Rose teaches is controlling the eccentric. We've said it before, but it's especially important with the row because that's where you're really getting the most muscle fiber recruitment is in that eccentric phase as you're
Mm-hmm.
putting the weight back down. That is where you're going to like be able to milk reps and really like when people talk about mind muscle connection, like that's where you would get the development of mind muscle connection, if anything, is from that eccentric
Is
portion.
exactly
So
not rushing the rep. I tell people do
yeah,
not rush the reps. Slow
yeah.
down. I tell people all the time,
It
slow down,
what
bro.
I will say is that perfectly fine, I think, to do an explosive concentric because
Oh, for
especially on
sure,
a row, you may not be able to get it up
for
very far,
sure.
like to the highest point that you can, unless you really
Mm-hmm.
like practice that explosively. Now, there's obviously times we can work on slowing down the concentric as we get more advanced, but I find like for learning, especially like getting that explosive concentric in combined with the slow eccentric, that's a great way for you to get the best of both worlds where you feel like you're not just like you know like it's everything is slow, you're all controlled. Like you want to have some element of explosiveness with it so that you prime your nervous system to be able to load more effectively over time.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And
I
I
agree.
feel like that eccentric is just something that like I learned that from Rose, and then I started thinking about that with a lot of other movements, and I think that that could be something that if you haven't really gotten an experience with the eccentrics, that where you feel like you're really feeling it, doing it on a row, that'll you'll feel that, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I
Especially
definitely
if you
agree.
is now another thing too that I think can really help people feel it, and we've talked about this in the past as well, is doing a chest supported variation. I think that is especially important because that way you learn to use no momentum. And then when you go back to doing something like a free weight barbell row, you'll have a better idea of what to do with your core to help you
Mm-hmm.
stabilize in that position because that's something
Yes.
that's also really tough about like a traditional barbell row is and why I see so many people mess it up is that your core is not very strong in that parallel position.
That and let's talk about a barbell row for a second. Since we're already talking about rows, and then we can talk about pull downs or something, or more specific lat work. But um, when people do bent over rows, a lot of time they do there's too much movement at the thoracic in terms of this right here. Like there's too much movement at the hinge, if that makes sense. So
Right.
people are coming up a little bit too high. If you're starting from the bottom, it doesn't have to be a pendulum row where there's no movement, or like a flexion row where there's like no movement at
Yeah.
all. But you want to minimize the movement. It's not a lot. And a lot of times I'll tell people instead of thinking about going up and down, you almost want to think about, again, because you're thinking about putting yourself in the best position through the range of motion. Sometimes you want to think about
Mm-hmm.
going slightly forward and back. So on the stretch, I kind of dip back a little bit And then on the actual concentric, I'll pull forward, or I'll kind of push myself forward just a little bit. And
Yeah.
it's almost just like a slight, like instead of me going straight down with the weight as well, it's almost like it's a slight, counterbalance, right? My hips might go back a little bit, but the weight goes just slightly forward. And then the weight kind of gets
Yep.
pulled back, or my hips go slightly forward. And it puts you in a very good position at the top, like for the contraction. I don't know if you play around with that as well, or kind of
Yeah.
what you do for barbell
Well,
rows, but I
for
just
me,
see that usually.
whatever it takes to get that squeeze at the top too. Like I try my best to be realistic too. When I'm loading a barbell row up, and like honestly, if you want to build a thick back, loading up a barbell row is, I think it's almost necessary. Um,
Mhm.
it's just going to give you like that trunk, that trunk development that you're not going to see from as much things like a chest supported row. And when it comes to loading the weight up a little bit, yeah, like you're going to have a little bit of that movement, like you were saying. But I think that as long as you're having awareness of the control, like how to control it and use it to your advantage, it's not necessarily bad if you have a little bit of movement of the whole body. We always try to isolate as much as possible, but with a barbell row, another thing that's important to realize is that that movement is really going to contribute to strength development a lot more, and overall, for sure, musculature. But I think that's why I think that more people should just stick to something like that. I see a lot of people doing the cable row, holding their lats like this, you know, talking about, I feel it, I can feel my back moving and stuff. You know, yes, that's great, but like, are you moving? Are you progressing every week? Like one thing about that barbell row is that you'll be able to, see if you're really making progress or not, and you
Mhm.
can make adjustments from there.
So
But yeah, what were you gonna
I
say?
was gonna say, I think this ties in good to what we talked about with I think it was the push training, or the chest and shoulder training, I think we talked about. But um you want to have some isolating movements, but you got to make sure you have those compound movements in there where you can move a lot more weight as well. So you can do
Yep.
an isolated like single arm cable lat row. Those honestly work very well for me. I don't usually like doing it from the top. I usually like going lateral with
Yeah.
those and just keeping that shoulder low. But again, everybody's gonna have their own things that work well for them, but you got to make sure you add in those things, like you said, that's going to really be able to put on the size, which is the heavier movements, the compound movements, like your deadlift or your bent over row or a pull up or a heavy lat pull down or something like that. And then you can add in the little isolating things, to kind of help bring in the entire physique, if that makes sense. Even hitting some rear
Yes.
delts, some erectors, maybe some lower trap, whatever you got to do for some of the accessory work that comes on the back end. But you got to make sure that you have some of those staple movements in. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a barbell bent over row. You could do a T-bar row, you could do a machine row, but
T bar is
yeah, but you gotta hit some heavy rows to get a thick back. That's what I at
absolutely.
least found to be the most effective.
Yeah, I also like there's kind of two different types of rows you can do too. Like I've had a fun time hitting high rows and seeing my upper back development, soar. I had
Mm-hmm.
not expected to have as much growth in like my upper traps and my rear delts as I did, but started doing high rows a lot more, and it had a similar effect, but it's slightly different than you like bending over,
Mm-hmm.
and doing it, all
It's
that,
it's
and
almost
even adding
I was
doing
gonna say
things
it's
with like
almost, yeah, it's almost like a Yates row kind of, where it's a little
yeah.
bit more emphasis on the lats and the lower traps, where you're not all the way bent over, but you're kind of almost at a 45-degree angle ish,
Yep.
maybe even a little higher than that. But yeah, I love those, especially
Mhm.
on the Smith machine, bro. Oh my
Oh yeah.
god, because you can really keep it
Oh
on the lat if you keep that pressure this way, because the bar can't move any further into you, right? So if you're just putting that
right.
pressure into the bar on a Smith, you're getting a lot more lat engagement, I feel like, than you would if you
Mhm.
even did it with a barbell sometimes. But then
Yeah.
again,
Oh.
if you do it on a barbell, you got to kind of
Mhm.
add a little extra to make sure the bar doesn't go in front of you. So to each their own. I think there's benefits and pros and
Yeah,
cons to
I was
both.
going to say, let me counter with that, because I think another exercise that you had mentioned earlier that really helped my development more than anything with barbell rows was the Pendlay row, where you put it back
Mm-hmm.
on the floor and you start it from the floor. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really great way to help you maximize the recruitment, in my mind, while still having more of an emphasis on developing your barbell row form, because you still get like that core benefit it is a little bit more challenging in some ways too, because it requires some hip flexion, some hip mobility to kind of get down in that position where you can still keep a somewhat flat back.
Hmm.
um, I've also found though, as you continue to do rows and chest, and I experience this from chest supported rows, is that you actually do want to let that have moments where you protract your shoulders.
Yeah,
And
you
that's
want that
also a
shoulder
place,
protraction.
that's a place like the Pendlay row where you can experience that with the barbell. And if you practice that, you'll have big lats in, I would say a few months. Honestly, you just got to keep
Telling you
being
that.
consistent.
And rear delts is one that a lot of people lack in, and just that simple protraction and retraction with a lot of row movements will even get the rear delts working as well. That's what a
Yep.
lot of people don't know, because you're loaded in that actual in the movement where you're actually retracting. And again, the
Hmm.
rear delts, one of their one of their functions is shoulder retraction as well, is actually getting the shoulders back, right? So that's like
Right.
when you open up and you're getting the shoulders back. So you can really, help your rear delts even when you're doing your road movements as well, as what people don't usually realize. But
Yeah.
how do you feel about like a racked, almost pendulum row where you're not going from the ground, but maybe you're going like right under the knee, almost like you would on like a, I don't know, like a rack deadlift or something like that.
Oh
What what,
yeah.
what do you?
You definitely similar benefits there. I mean, I would say that's even more accessible to learn. And I see nothing wrong with it really. The only thing I would say is that Pendlay rows might be a good thing to throw into your program if you're deadlifting on a consistent basis, because
Mhm.
it is similar to the deadlift starting position. And I've just noticed that every time I go to grab the deadlift, like I go to grab deadlifts, I have that similar positioning to Pendlay rows, but then I'm like, oh, it's a different motion, but my
Mhm.
lats just feel really like connected to the bar at that point.
Probably because that
And it,
movement's so similar. Yeah.
yeah, it is. And there's also some core stability benefits in that like
Hmm.
putting yourself in that lower positioning, and then when
And
you go
having
to
to stay
deadlift,
there.
yeah, it
Yeah.
feels good. So I think that's a one of those examples where, like, if you wanted to have a solid back day, you could even put deadlifts on a day, um like some accessory deadlifts of some kind, like along with like something like a Pendlay row, and just really toast your CNS
Hmm.
a little bit. You probably wouldn't have to do that many accessories after that. That the other thing that I think we should talk about too is how important it is to do unilateral work with rows, because there's also a tendency when you're doing massive contractions with both sides, you may not be realizing how much one side is contributing versus the other.
You see this a lot on pull, and this is what I want to talk about next. I think this would be a good one to talk about, is probably pull ups and lat pull downs, because you'll have some people
Mm-hmm.
where either one side is stronger than the other, and you can clearly see one shoulder going up a little bit more, or one arm getting down just a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? You can kind of see
Mm-hmm.
those things. Maybe not if you're doing it, you might not be able to feel it, but if I look at a client, or even sometimes I'll see videos myself, and I'm like, okay, there's a small imbalance there. I need to be able to, target and fix. So, what are some things I think? Or what are some lat pull down or pull up cues that work for you, that you have either helped you? And we can even wait and hit the unilateral stuff first. I just know this is one in particular
Yes.
specifically that I see a lot of people, you see the imbalance clearly. So maybe we can talk about lat pull downs and what works well for you, and then a way to be able to work in the unilateral work to make up with, for some of those muscle imbalances that you might have.
Well, I would say lat pull downs, stretch at the top, squeeze at the bottom. That's one of those basic cues that a lot of things apply to, but especially with the lat pull downs, I really feel that one. Um, like you said before, I would take the thumb off the grip every now and then. I don't mind thumb gripping a little bit, because I do actually like working on my grip strength. So I don't necessarily always do that. I also experiment with the different attachments, which does kind of change the way I do things sometimes. Like I use the Max Advantage grip, one, because I kind of like how it's a little bit more neutral, and it's easier to help me feel my elbows driving down. And that's a cue that I was actually working with a client the other day, and she's done bodybuilding. She's done shows in the past. She's gone through a prep, and I just told her, like, hey, elbows, just simple, real simple cue. I didn't really try to overcomplicate it and be like, well, this is the way the elbow moves, or through how the joint moves through the range of motion and all this. Just,
Hmm.
driving with the elbows towards your, and then kind of thinking about bringing it towards the center and kind of poking your chest out at the top,
Push the
similar
chest
to what
up.
you were talking about.
So
Yep,
important. So
chest
important,
up.
dude. That's my number one. Whenever I'm coaching clients, whether it be pull-ups or lat pull downs, and pull-ups is tough to keep your chest high with. But lat pull downs, dude, that's the first thing I notice all the time. If that chest ain't high, you're not getting the stretch in your lats that you want to be getting. I promise you. If you keep
Right.
that chest high, even on the stretch, and you still let your shoulders protract, but the chest is high, the way that the
Hmm.
tension is built up on the lat and the way that the lat actually works, you keep that tension through that stretch. Right when you let that chest drop and you're just doing this, where's the tension in the lats now? It's not there. You
Yep.
go up like this, you can automatically feel where that lat wants to like already wants to kick in from here, and you keep
Right.
that chest high all the way through that range, dude. That's one thing that is, if you just do that and you keep the elbows just slightly to the anterior. So we don't want to be pulling all the way back here. We're gonna keep the elbows slightly to the
Mhm.
anterior, and usually I like to pull to the top of the chest. You
Down.
can play with that,
Yeah.
but usually I like to go to the top of the chest and just keep that chest high, and you feel the lat contraction and engagement you feel there is I think by far better than probably any other cue I've used in the past, because I've gone through different cues, and I think that's kind
Yep.
of the beauty of what we do is you're gonna go through different cues, you're gonna try different things. Maybe the same cue that worked for you before is not working the same now, and maybe you just understand the movement a little bit better to have a slightly different cue now. That could even happen. But right when I
That's
notice,
true.
okay, chest stays high the whole time, I feel a good stretch the entire time. I keep the tension on the lat. I'm like, well, shit. If I just keep focus on keeping my chest as high as I can, getting a full stretch, and trying to just pull the bar to my upper chest. I'm like, and again, it's like you said, it's not thinking about, like, we know the complicated stuff, right? We know all the intricate stuff, right? It's
Yep.
how can I communicate that either to clients or also make it, conceptualize it for me to make it as simple as I can for me, because that's when I'm training, that's another thing I'm trying to do. How can I make these cues as simple as I can for me so that when I go coach somebody else, it's easy and it's not me dancing around, because I'm the type of person where I like the sciencey stuff, and I'll talk
Yeah.
about the sciencey stuff even with clients because I like them to understand, but not everybody has that same mind, or not even everybody even wants to understand, and it can get confusing. So I
Yeah.
think having those really simple
Absolutely.
cues, like you said, when you're dealing with your client and just saying, look, just drive the elbows down. Or like when I tell clients, look, keep the chest as high as you can. That's all I want you to focus on. Keep the chest as high as you can, pull the top of the chest. If you make it simple like that, I think that's something either for lat pull downs and pull ups. That could be something that's very beneficial as well.
Yeah. I think another thing to really talk about, and one thing that you know is not necessarily um, I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily talked about enough, but mobility is plays a major role in all of this. Like, if you have tight lats, then it'll feel really tough to do some of the things that we're describing. I think also, like, learning how your scaps move.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's where I would say just doing a couple of things before you do your lat pull downs or pull ups, right? One thing I would do, like dead hangs, those are great. Just let everything kind of stretch out. You don't have to do it for very long, but it's great because you really don't want to do it for too long. Your grip will get really tired, but that's a good way to also get your grip woke up
Mm-hmm.
before you go. I like to, like I said before in past videos, there's a little pre-exhaust that you want to do. I think it's okay to hang there for a little bit. Also, you get some spinal decompression, which is nice if you're recovering from the previous workout, or you're just feeling kind of tight walking into the gym today, whatever. And then from there, you can also do some scapular pull-ups where you just go from, you start with your head down by your ears in that
Yep.
hanging position. You just let it fully stretch, and then you try to really create as much space as you can between your ear and your shoulder, and you just rep that out a couple of times. And you can also start to notice, oh, maybe one side is working harder than the other, and that way you can just like make a little bit of an adjustment, even if it's just trying to connect to it a little bit more, that left side, whichever side. And also just stretching some of those other muscles that might be tight, like we were saying, we want to bring it down to the chest. The chest is really tight, and it can be easy for your shoulders to round forward, right? So just having some awareness of your mobility can also make a huge difference in your ability to execute the movement
Huge,
efficiently.
huge. Because even when it comes to the rows, like we were talking about, when it comes to shoulder extension, And again, it's just something that, like, it's just some people just have really tight shoulders or really underdeveloped rear delts where, or overdeveloped, anterior delts where they're just round a little bit forward. And so getting into that fully extended position when they're not used to being there is tough sometimes. So I have to like really coach harder, almost like pull their shoulders back for them to be like, oh, this is what that feels like. Cause they don't even know what it feels like. They're like, oh, that's how
Right.
I'm supposed to move. And it's like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to move. So
Yeah.
but it's just something you got to kind of go over. And like you said, you got to be able to assess. And another prime or a primer I kind of like to do before I do lat pull downs or pull ups as well. I like to do dead hangs as well. I love doing scapular retractions. And I also do a scapular retraction where not only do I pull my shoulders kind of straight down, but I also pull the chest up with it, where I kind of try to lift my
Mhm.
chest up and create an arch in the back.
Yeah.
That'll get your lats a little bit more engaged too. But then I also like to just go up and just pause at the top of a pull up or at the bottom of a lat pull down, for instance, to just squeeze everything in my back as hard as I can, just for about 3 to 5 seconds. And I'll just do a few
Yeah.
reps of
Get the
that just to
top
really
of the
get it
vein.
engaged, just to try to get it engaged a little bit. And then, then I'll start kind of either jumping in my actual warm up sets, or maybe I do that after my, warm up sets before I go into my working set, just to really make sure that I'm engaged enough. But, you
Yeah.
play around with whatever routine works with you.
You know what? Let's also talk about some things that we can do because I realize you were talking about pull-ups, and pull-ups are hard. Pull-ups are hard. Most people can't do a pull-up. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are some things that what you were just talking about, just holding at the top of the bar right there. That's a great regression for pull-ups. Like
Oh,
just
yeah.
trying your best to hold yourself at the top. Even
Oh,
if you
yeah.
can't do this grip specifically, you might just start with the underhand grip,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, just to help you build up that base strength and
Yeah, but
coordination.
what I would tell you to do, especially if the pull ups is something you really want to get better at, spending a lot of time at both the bottom and the top half of the range of motion is
Mhm.
important. So what I mean by that is, like, a
Yep.
lot of people are so focused on getting from the bottom all the way up to the top, when really, even if you go in reverse and I just get to the top and I hold, let's say I hold for a max of, I don't know,
10
6 seconds,
seconds.
10
Yep.
seconds, even. Okay, we'll say 10 seconds. The next time you go in to do pull ups, you can always progressively overload. You try to hold for a little bit longer than that. It might only be 12. Maybe you can get up to 15. Who knows? But the next time you're trying to at least match that or get better. So you can still progressively overload that. But then you can also do the same from the opposite end to say, okay, I started from the bottom. I'm pulling up now. I might only get here. Okay. And you notate where you get. The next time you go in the gym, maybe I can get here. Next time I go in the gym, maybe I can get here. And you keep trying to get just a little bit more range paired with the really hard contractions and seeing how long you can hold up there. And that strength, and also just I think probably just motor recruitment and just that motor unit, or just just moving with that specific pattern is gonna get better anyways over time. And so your pull-ups are just gonna end up getting better. So there's a strength aspect from actually being able to get all the way to the top. And I think that's
Mhm.
mainly taken care of from just holding at the top as long as you can. And when you do fail, controlling the eccentric as much as you can for the most part.
Yes.
I think that's really good.
Yes.
And then pairing that with just like progressive from the bottom pull ups to just make sure that you're keep kind of increasing the range of motion. It seems a little weird, but I'm telling you, it's something that has worked, that I've worked with
Oh
clients
yeah.
before, and it's worked.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing that's important is, like I said before, I mentioned earlier in this podcast is the regression, right? Like, use it, try a banded pull up. Banded pull ups are pretty hard too. If you
Banded ones
can't
too.
do the
Yep.
banded pull up, the assisted pull up machine, and you could also make this argument for dips too. The assisted dip machine is a really great resource and just a good way to measure your effort and how many reps you can realistically get with a certain load. And that way you
Mm-hmm.
can be a lot more precise from session to session. You can say, well, I did this amount of assistance last time, so I'm going to try to do less assistance on this next set. And I would say too, especially with that type of strategy, I would start with as little assistance as you can on the first set while you're still fresh. And that way, as you start to fail, you can increase the assistance and continue to get more quality reps and good technique under that stress. And I think that the banded pull-ups are really great, especially like we were saying with the eccentric. Really having a hard time feeling the eccentric, then try starting off with a band where you can really practice that lowering phase a lot more, like with just more reps. That's the hardest thing is like sometimes you're gonna do like a pull up and be like, yeah, okay, I got another one, and then you get to the third or fourth pull up and you're like, dang, I don't know why I can't get up there,
I
you
know
know?
it jumps on you fast. But
Yeah.
I think we can probably do a whole segment on pull-ups alone. You know what I'm saying? Like a whole
Yeah,
episode on pull-ups
absolutely.
alone.
It's
So,
it's one of the beautiful calisthenic movements that, from that point, there's so many things that can be done.
dude, I think I'd argue pull-ups is king, to be honest, in terms of full back development. It's just one of those things where like either you got to do an assisted, pull-up machine until you can get strong enough to do pull-ups and really be able to maximize. So that's my caveat there is like if you can't do pull-ups, do not be afraid to do a lat pull down. But I'd even say if you have access to an assisted pull-up machine, I'd love you to
Do
add
it.
that in to make sure that you can actually get to the point where you can progressively overload that as well, where you can
I'm the
drop more
same
weight
way,
off.
man.
So because
Yeah,
dude, man, pull ups, I'm telling you, bro. And I was like, I used to love them when I was doing calisthenics and everything, and I got into bodybuilding. I kind of went away from them, and then when I started adding them back in about a year ago, my back development shot through the roof, way more than it
insane.
had before.
Oh
And I was
yeah,
like, why the hell did I
and
stop
you can
doing
get
pull ups?
real saucy with them. Like you can add weight, do weighted
Yep,
pull-ups. That's something I've
yep.
been doing for the last 2 years, and you can go check my Instagram page. I've been doing weighted pull-ups for a while, and I can firmly say that it has helped my overall development, and even my arms have gotten stronger and bigger. From doing things like weighted pull-ups. That's one of
Grip
those things
strength,
too that
everything. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's the thing too is like really that's one of the most applicable movements to your life that you'll ever do.
Mhm.
Like if you're and
You
this is
hanging off a
something.
cliff.
Yeah, I was
You
about to
going?
say
Hey,
that's exactly it. That's
what you
that
gonna
you're
do?
right. I
What you gonna
always
do?
tell my class, I'm like, what if you're hanging off a cliff? Like, what are you gonna
You
do?
gonna
Just
die? You
hang
gonna pull
there?
yourself up?
Yeah, no,
Huh?
you're gonna pull yourself up. That's right.
Yep.
So like I don't know. That's just something me like I feel the need to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
You,
I
you
feel the
you
need to
wouldn't
point
think,
that out
oh
with training in general, dude. You know what I mean? People I talk to, I'm
yes,
like, fine, I get you want to look good, okay, you want to be healthy, okay. But from a pure survival standpoint, if you ever get in a situation, I just saw a video of a lady who slipped off a cliff and this dude had to pull her up, right? I don't know where it was on. It was TikTok, Instagram, something. Lady slipped off a cliff. He's just running along the trail with his girlfriend, I think, and he has a GoPro on, and she's like, "There's like a girl over there on the side." He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like,
she's
"My
like,
mom slipped
help.
off. Help me!" And the mom's literally just
Oh
hanging there,
my
can't pull herself up. Don't
gosh.
get me wrong, she doesn't have a lot of leverage, so it's probably hard to really get
Yeah.
herself up. But the fact that he was able to help her is really what I'm pointing out. The fact that he was
Hmm.
able to pull her up, if he wasn't fit enough, do you think he'd be able to do that? If somebody else came through there and wasn't able to help her, what would have happened?
She would
Could
have
they have held
died
her
for sure.
there for 30
Yup.
minutes until somebody else came to help? I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
So that's my point. You have to be, think about yourself, but also think about others. Can I help or save somebody else or somebody I love in a case where they need me? Right.
Absolutely.
But
I'm
I know we got a couple more things we want to touch on. I want to touch on traps and I want to touch on the erectors. Those are the other two
Mhm,
things I want to make sure we touch on too. So let's just start with traps. What are
mhm.
some, I mean, obviously shrugs, everybody does them, but what are some specific movements for shrugs that you do and some cues that work well for you when you execute them?
Well, I would say shrugs. That one's also one of those ones that I've noticed a stretch, making your arms long as you can. There's also a little bit of rotator cuff element to it. I would experiment with the way that you rotate them. Maybe try doing some where you rotate back, some where you rotate forward. Um, Dumbbells are one of the ways I started off doing shrugs, but I also like doing like just having some kind of shrug machine where you can really load it, like have
Mm-hmm.
some more loadability.
Mm-hmm.
But I still have love for the dumbbells because they help me develop that grip strength really well. And also, when you think about it, picking up heavy dumbbells is going to potentiate you with other dumbbell exercises. Like one of the things that I notice when I do things like a heavy shrug is if I'm doing another dumbbell related movement like a few days after that workout, when I'm recovered, I those weights in my hand might feel a little light. They might just feel a little bit like my nervous system might be a little more adjusted to that, how it feels. So that can help me sometimes eke out one or two more reps on something else. So I found that shrugs with dumbbells definitely have some benefits, especially if you don't use with straps. I think it's important to use straps, obviously, too, if you want to maximize the amount of reps that you can get and train to failure. But also don't be afraid to push your grip strength farther because that will allow you to pick up heavier loads and work with those later on too. I think that also you can play around with the different types of equipment. Like one thing I love actually is just grabbing the trap bar and just shrugging with that because it's a very natural thing. And maybe you grab the thick one, work the grip strength that way as well. Or you grab the thin one where it's easy, strap up there and load it up. And that can also have some carryover benefits when you're doing things like deads. You also see a lot of Olympic lifters. They do something where they do like a shrug deadlift. I mean, you can always add some kind of shrug even to the top of your deadlift if you wanted to. I wouldn't
See,
recommend that though. I wouldn't recommend doing that too heavy. But and I've seen some
I'm a
people do it, and
bro. I'm gonna
I'm
put
kind
you
of
on right
sketched out.
now. I'm gonna put you on right
Yeah.
now. That it worked. Well, okay, I'll say this. I do power shrugs. That's what I like to do because you can
Hmm.
load them up a little bit more because you use the momentum and you do it from a rack position. So I might start my rack position somewhere around my knees.
Yep.
Probably somewhere around there for the bar. And what I'll do from there is I'll use my leg drive to get the bar up because I can move a little bit more weight with that momentum. And I use that momentum as I go up to bring my shoulders up at the top, right? So it's one continuous thing. My legs kind of go up, and as I straighten out, then I pull up as high as I can. You can do that, or you can do the deadlifts with the shrugs at the top. Just know that you're not going to have as much momentum with the deadlifts or the shrug with the deadlifts or the shrugs at the top, but the carryover is very similar. But for me personally, that was the one thing, and I used to do shrugs all the time. When I started doing power shrugs, my traps grew. I mean, it was one thing I was always like, bro, I just can't grow traps. I was convinced. I was like, I try to do some trap flies. I try to do some like almost like slightly bent over, like 45-degree shrugs I saw somebody do before. I'm like, bro, nothing's
Hmm.
working. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just try to load up more because I was doing rack pulls. And I don't necessarily
Hmm.
recommend rack pulls, but if you want to move a lot of weight, sure. But I was doing rack pulls because my lower back, I wanted to start deadlifting, but I wanted to start doing rack pulls before I got into the actual deadlifts. Anyways, I said, let's just try to load up these shrugs. And I'm just gonna do it for like 4 weeks and see what happens. My traps improved probably literally like probably doubled in size almost. I mean, they were prominent, like even to the point now where I'm
Yes.
like, dude, like I'm like, what? I think even when we met, that when we worked at a Madhouse, I told you I was like, dude, I don't know how much. I mean, like I knew, but I'm like, I just wasn't expecting them to progress that much. So the one thing I tell people all the time now when they say I need to grow my traps, and again, I know everybody's different, but I'm saying just try some power shrugs from a rack position. So like I said, bar
Hmm.
set up, racked somewhere around the knee, and
Yeah.
then use leg drive to get the weight up, and just drive straight up as high as you can. You want to hold there for a second, slow on the way down, and then let yourself
Yep.
re-rack.
Yeah,
But
you could even do that with a machine too. Like
oh, for sure.
or I've seen there's like a free motion Smith machine. I found that to be really good for something like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Because
Smith
you can
machine
drive back a
shrugs
little bit
too.
more.
Yeah. You can play around with the angles and stuff. And that's one thing too is like upper traps are very prominent. Like you'll notice them on your physique. So I think they can definitely get a lot of work from a lot of the other movements you do too, like deadlifts and squatting and all types of things. But like as long as you are putting some emphasis on it with your goals, like if your goal is to have a fully rounded physique, then by all means like add some shrugs in. But another thing I like to work on is like some of the lower trap development, and I found that doing chest supported rows has also helped my lower traps, which
Oh, dude, I
is
got
not something.
no, my
Yeah,
bad.
what
I
were you
mean,
gonna
I
say?
got I got one other one I forgot to mention. The lower traps. If you get on a like an incline bench prone, so like laying straight down on it, chest on it, like you said, chest supported, and basically like you said, all you do is just let the dumbbells hang and you just retract. You just focus
Hmm.
on shoulder retraction, let it protract all the way so you can get a full stretch, and you just focus on shoulder retraction. The lower trap engagement there is insane, bro.
Yeah,
It's actually insane.
I
Like I
believe
was
it.
surprised.
And I think that, another thing that is really important to recognize about full back development is erectors. Uh, that's where you're going to see the Christmas tree at the bottom. And not everybody's huge on the Christmas tree. It's not like an absolute, necessity to see a nice back, but it definitely shows that you've been putting that work in. Um, Erectors, you're definitely going to want to focus on movements that are massive, that use your trunk, like RDLs, deadlifts, and variations of those, and doing things like deficit deadlifts and conventional deadlifts, especially. will work your erectors to death. Um, hence the name deadlift. And then other things too, like the barbell row. They're gonna. That's why a lot of people love barbell row so much too, because when you think about that thick, like referring back to the thickness and developing that Christmas tree, the erectors play a large role in that. Um, what do you think about that?
I agree. I think deadlifts are great for deadlifts. I think deadlifts for
Deadlifts
erectors.
are great for deadlifts.
Yeah. Um, I
Long
think
day.
right, yeah. I don't know, man. I think personally for me, back extensions are still king. I mean, your
Yes.
erectors are going to be smashed when you do deadlifts, regardless, and you can go heavier. So I get it, but you can really
Hmm.
isolate the erectors when you do deadlifts. And I'll tell you even one other exercise after I kind of explain how to do the back extensions. And the reason I say this because a lot of people either use too much momentum, so they go too fast. They either don't have enough lumbar flexibility, so to speak, or mobility, so they're too straight.
Hmm.
You need to actually be able to round and arch the back. Um, or they're not set up correctly in the actual back extension machine. So you should be right under the hips essentially to do this. And you want to get a full stretch at the bottom. So the back should basically be rounded at the bottom. And all I want to do from the bottom is pick my chest up. So if this is my chest and this is where I'm locked in at the bottom, all I want to do is start doing this. And then I'll end up basically arching and pulling over the erectors essentially, right? So a lot of people would
Hmm.
do this and it's like hamstrings basically or glutes a little bit being used when it really you need to be like this where now these are the erectors and you're rounding back onto the erectors, and if you do that even controlling it on the way down, so a slow eccentric and a slow concentric, you don't need any weight, you can do this body weight and you'll be burnt out within 8 to 12 reps, I promise you. So that's one thing you could try, even adding the pause at the top, squeezing there really really hard. Again, you're not doing any extra movement other than arching the back and feeling a good contraction and then controlling it going back down. If you don't want to do that, or if you want another variation from that, another thing I'll do sometimes is I'll get on the lateral cable machine. I'll grab a bar or some type of attachment, and all I'll do from there is I'll let myself round at the back, and I'll literally just do
Hmm.
nothing but pull this back like this, so that the erectors again, you're locking your erectors in, and all my back is doing is this when I'm in that lateral machine. Is doing this, I'm letting it
Right.
relax. My erectors are stretching, and I'm just arching my back and pulling my chest back, and my erectors are working. That's another way you could do it seated if you wanted to do that instead of doing the back extension machine. But those two alone are great, at least for me, that I've done in terms of building my lower back and my erectors.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we should really try to reinforce with that too is that, when people talk about like, oh, my back hurts, I'm like, you probably have a weak back. Like one of the reasons why you are struggling with back pain is because your back may be weak. You may also have a herniated disc, but chances
Yeah,
are
you might be
you're
hurt,
just
but
starting out, if you're just starting out in the gym and your back's hurting, like your back's weak, and that's okay. Like you're gonna have some soreness back there. Um, it takes a while to develop things based on your anatomy, and the way that you're going to move weight may be different than somebody else. So it's really important that you just try your best to maintain form, and select. That's where exercise selection, in terms of like you're saying, like having these different movements, like a hyperextension in there, will definitely help you develop those erectors with a little bit more precision,
mm-hmm.
because you may not necessarily be seeing the direct stimulus from deadlifts.
Exactly.
Another
So
one to
yeah.
mention. Oh,
No, go
one
ahead. Go
more
ahead.
thing I was going to say. The reverse hyper is also. I just started working at a gym that has a reverse hyper machine,
Mm-hmm.
and it is gold. It is gold, man. It is one of my favorite exercises because, like you were saying, with the hyperextension, you get that stretch at the bottom. There, you're starting in that stretch position and
Mm-hmm.
then squeezing it all the way up. So you get to strengthen that range of motion, and that's
Mm-hmm.
going to help you a lot with
And you're
maintaining.
starting from yeah, you're starting
Yeah,
from the most least leverage, especially the way the reverse hyper and the weights in there. I mean, you're like at the worst position. You're like at the weakest position, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And so you really having to strengthen those erectors. And I mean, the hamstrings is good for that as well. Obviously, the glutes too. But no,
yep,
yeah, I agree with all that. And I would say another thing, just to kind of add that in there, about if you're feeling any back pain, like Alex said, either your back is underdeveloped or you might have some muscle imbalances somewhere, right? The glutes could be a little tight. Even hips could be a little tight. Some
Yep.
even hamstrings can be tight that can end up leading to some back problems or at least lower back problems. So just being aware of all that, having a very well-rounded program and knowing how to address those things is really important too. Um, but I think there's a lot more stuff where we have
We
so much
got
stuff to
more to
talk
talk
about.
about, y'all.
We got so much stuff to talk about, but that was good. I think that was good for back. We touched on rows to pull down, so hitting your width and your thickness, also traps and erectors. So I think those are some good cues, honestly.
Yeah,
So
we covered it.
that was the wrap in terms of we've hit everything now so far when it came to like kind of lifting cues or at least some tips to give y'all for training those areas. So if y'all see this and there's anything you want to see, because I don't think we have anything exactly planned for next episode, but if you see this and you want us to touch on something, let us know. Like I said, we already have a lot of topics in the book. We even got some interviews we want to do as well, but we're always wanting to get some actual engagement, some other feedback from y'all. So, and we got to start using our other socials as well to try to boost that
Yes.
engagement too. So,
Well, we're gonna
uh,
start. We're gonna start clipping up some of our videos here soon, and you'll be seeing us a little too much on social media
yeah,
coming here
probably.
soon.
I want to be annoying as hell. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right.
All right.
Well,
Well,
good talking, bro. I'll see you next week.
protein.
Oh, hold up, protein.
Ugh, gotta eat your protein, baby.
I need your protein.
That's the
Make
thing
sure you
too.
take
Don't
protein.
do all this shit and then not eat your protein,
Yeah,
y'all.
what y'all think I'm
That's
drinking in
messed up.
here? What do y'all think this is? Nah, it's coffee.
Yo, see that protein, baby. Let's go.
Nah, all right, brother. I'll see you next week. All right.
All right,
Pour it
all
on
right, all
yourself.
right.
You want pour it on yourself right now.
Ah, ah, ah.